Well, the Kentucky Wildcats picked up a huge bubble win over Mississippi State on Wednesday. Is Coach Cal's team actually going to go dancing after all?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is up? Welcome to the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Andy Patton, and today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook partner of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Well, I am joined today by Lance Daw, the host of Locked On Kentucky, talking about a much needed win for the Wildcats over Mississippi State on Wednesday. Lance, you described this game as the bubble game of the year. How impactful of a win was this for Coach Calipari and the Wildcats in terms of making the big dance?
Well, Andy, to be completely honest with you, I had a feeling if Kentucky didn't find a way to win this one, they probably were not going to make it into the NCAA tournament. It's so weird. Just a couple weeks ago, I thought Kansas might have been the biggest game of the year for Kentucky, but as it turns out, that game definitely would have helped their chances. Sure. But this was the one way, okay, if we lose this, then it's over. And Kentucky needed that quad one victory to kind of help them rise in the net rankings. And so, it's about as big of a game as they could have possibly had. It was the definition of a must-win game, and they barely, and I mean barely, got the victory over Mississippi State. A really, really fun, I would say, back and forth affair between two teams that I think are very evenly matched. Mississippi State obviously took advantage of what they had down low with Tolu Smith. Oscar Tshiebwe statistically had a really good game, especially when it came to rebounding the ball and some really clutch moments for the Wildcats. So, just a really fun back and forth game that ended up with a Wildcat victory. A fun note, Andy. Kentucky has not lost at Mississippi State since 2008. So we came into this game kind of expecting, all right, well, if the trends continue, then we should be able to continue to stay on the bubble. And sure enough, the Wildcats were able to get it done.
No Severe Wheeler for Kentucky in this game. Cason Wallace has quite honestly, a horrendous shooting night. 1 of 13, 0 of 8 from deep, just could not get the ball to go through the bucket. And I got to tell you, there are a lot of games this year where if you told me Wheeler doesn't play, Wallace makes one shot, finishes with 4 points, and Kentucky still wins, I'm not sure that I would have believed you. What do you think about this game kind of helped Kentucky be able to power through some struggles with the young guards and still be able to pull out a victory?
Well, I think a couple of things we have to note here, Andy, and I might have talked with this about this with you on your show just months ago, just talking about how when Kentucky gets out of rhythm on offense, it's not necessarily their plays or anything like that. It's them rushing things. And I think you saw that with Cason Wallace consistently last night with them rushing their offense at times, and Wallace just kind of fogging shots up that he doesn't normally take in those situations. I will say, to kind of give him some credit, he did have 11 assists to 1 turnover, so he was making his impact in the 38 minutes that he had on the floor. But yeah, if Kentucky had gotten just a little bit of offense out of him, this may have been a 5, 6, 7 point victory. But it's also, I think, when you look at the way that Kentucky's offense operates, it's a little bit different stylistically than what we may see across the SEC when it comes to seeing a lot of mid-range jumpers, seeing a lot of shots in that area of the paint where you just don't normally see that in a traditional modern offense. It's more traditional for the Wildcats. And so guys like Jacob Toppin being able to play really solid in this game, knocking down his mid-range jumpers consistently. He was 7 of 9 from the floor. Tshiebwe hit a couple of those foul line shots that he has been kind of known for whenever he steps out of the paint. And then Antonio Reeves, somebody who has developed into a really consistent scorer for the Wildcats as their bench has gotten tighter. He has been able to insert himself into the starting lineup, and he has been a really good shooter for the Wildcats outside the arc. I'm surprised that he didn't get burnt out in this game against Georgia. He was shooting really, really well to begin that game, was really solid in the first half, and then his legs just kind of gave out from under him in the second, and he wasn't able to kind of get the elevation on his shot that he needed to. But it was an all-around effort, I think, Andy, from this team, especially when you look at the fact that they're not playing a bench essentially right now. I mean, they had 8 minutes for Lance Ware, 8 minutes for Thiero, 6 minutes for Damian Collins, but those guys aren't really doing much when they're in the game outside of what they bring defensively. But the whole point of them getting into the game is to kind of give the starters just a little bit of breath, if
Right.
that. So it was essentially a victory for a starting lineup. And
Mhm.
I am really hoping that CJ Frederick and Severe Wheeler come back, not necessarily for what they both bring to the table, although I am excited about that, but more about just giving this rotation some breathing room, because this game could have been, I would say, a little bit easier for the Wildcats if they had those
Mhm.
guys.
Well, one thing you talked about on your show recently as well is the playing time for Oscar Tshiebwe. We're talking about National Player of the Year, guys that don't rarely even return to college, and yet he's back. He's here with Kentucky, and one of the recent reports was that he's going to see a little bit less playing time going forward. Can you talk to me about what Calipari is doing here? What the plan is with Tshiebwe? It didn't really happen in this game, but like you said, there wasn't a whole lot of depth going around for Kentucky in general. But do you think we'll see a little bit less of Tshiebwe on a game-to-game basis going forward? And do you think that's a good thing for Kentucky?
Yeah, so last season, Oscar Tshiebwe, especially later in the year, was struggling on the defensive end of the floor. And I said coming into this season, we're going to need to see improvement on that side of the ball, whether it
Mhm.
be protecting the rim a little bit better, understanding his assignment, not leaving it at random times, which he has been prone to
Sure.
do. The defense has kind of played with him at different times this season, depending on who the opponent is. But it's consistently been not necessarily against a player that's taller, but against a player that's just as physical down low at the
Mhm.
five. And Oscar Tshiebwe has defensively struggled with that. I've said for what it feels like weeks now that he should maybe get his minutes trimmed. And it came to a point where I did a show recently where I said he should get benched. If he's going to be playing the way that he is
Yeah.
on the defensive end of the floor, look, he can get his 15 and 12 a night, but that's not cutting it.
Mhm.
It's really nice to see him getting those points on the offensive end of the floor, but he's given up about 20 on the other end.
Mhm.
So I thought that maybe rotationally, Kentucky should do some things differently. And then Coach Cal on a radio show earlier this week came out and said, you know what? I think we should start playing Ugonna Onyenso and Damian Collins more. And it's just
Mhm.
one of those where it's like, brother, every single time the fan base has suggested something about this rotation, Cal comes around to it about 2.5 weeks too late. And it's just like, hey, maybe I should do that. Yeah, you probably should, man. And the funny thing about this is he wants to play Ugonna Onyenso, our 5-star backup center.
Mhm.
Didn't play against Mississippi State. Didn't play him. So he's like, hey, maybe I should play these guys. He gives Collins 6 minutes. He gives
Mhm.
Ware 8. I think he's trying to rotationally adjust things, which I do appreciate the fact that, I think some people are very critical of Cal and the
Mhm.
fact that he coaches a little bit differently maybe than the fans want him to, but he's
Mhm.
still out here making an effort. I think that's
Yes.
very clear with the way that he's kind of adjusted things. So
Mhm.
maybe continuing to do that is kind of what the fans are hoping for, maybe
Mhm.
making some adjustments down low. I think Oscar, if the team is healthy,
Yeah.
should play less.
Yeah.
That's just my take on that. I think if Coach Cal truly is saying that, he should follow up with that. I'm not
Mhm.
sure if he's going to. That's actually something I talked about on yesterday's show. It's like, well, he can say all of this he wants in front of a microphone, but it
Mhm.
only truly matters whenever he makes the adjustment in game. So
Mhm.
I want to see him actually do that.
Well, and Tennessee, Kentucky's got some really tough games coming up, including Tennessee, who they're playing on Saturday. They got Auburn still. They got Arkansas left on the calendar. So while this game over Mississippi State was huge in terms of them not losing their spot on the bubble, things are not necessarily going to get a lot easier for Coach Calipari and the Wildcats right now. Looking at ahead at the schedule with those three games, a couple other not as difficult games, although Kentucky has proven they can lose to just about anybody in the SEC this year. Do you still think this team ends up in the field of 68? And if so, what do you think is going to need to happen for them to get into the big dance?
I think a couple of things are going to have to happen, Andy. And the answer is yes, I do believe that they're going to be
Mhm.
able to make it. I think, first of all, you have to find some type of better rim protection,
Sure.
defensively, whether that be in the
Mhm.
half court or in the transition game. Mississippi State is one of the slowest teams in the nation. They had 19 fast break points on the Wildcats just the other night.
Mhm.
19. That's one of the slowest teams in the
Yeah.
country that can't shoot, and they had 19 fast break
Yeah.
points on Kentucky. You have to be able to solve that. You have to be able to find ways to get back in transition better than what you are right now. And the second thing is, I think Kentucky needs their guards, their outside shooters, to perform a little bit better. I know Antonio Reeves, like I said, has been playing really well right now for the Wildcats, but
Mhm.
if CJ Frederick is inserted back into this lineup, statistically, as the year has gone on, he's gotten worse.
Yeah.
And so we need him to step
Mhm.
up and do his job because he's a little bit of a defensive liability as well. We need guys like CJ Frederick, guys like Casey Wallace. I'm not saying they need to hit 50% of their outside shots. What I'm saying is they just need to be more consistent than what they have been. So maybe finding a little bit more transition defense, maybe finding a little bit more of that outside offense is going to help Kentucky against teams like Tennessee, Auburn, Florida, Arkansas, teams that are a
Mhm.
little bit more defensive minded maybe finding ways to just kind of either keep up or maintain a lead with those two factors. If they do improve in those areas, I think they certainly could win. They could win 4 out of these last 5 games, to be completely honest with you. It's just all about finding that momentum and knocking down your shots. That's essentially what it comes down to. And I know that's a really basic analysis, but that's kind of what you come to. That's what you chalk it up to here as you're trying to get to the big dance, is just finding ways to win the simple things, I think, at this point.
Well, Northwestern isn't even a bubble team anymore. They are looking like an easy at-large team after wins over Purdue and Indiana. Can this team make a Sweet 16 or later run this year? More on that, but first, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Maybe you like Kentucky's chances against a Tennessee team coming off a huge win, or maybe you want to keep rolling with Northwestern, who we will talk about momentarily. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a bigger chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, joined now by Carter Bird, the host of the Locked On Northwestern podcast, to talk about these last 2 weeks. 4 straight victories, including a win over Purdue, and now, of course, the season sweep over Indiana. Carter, we were talking before recording about how the whole state of Indiana is not particularly happy with Northwestern right now in sole possession of second place in the Big Ten. Carter, I want to kind of go back a little farther, and there was a 2-game period of time where Northwestern got absolutely smacked by Iowa. I think they lost by 16 in that one, lost to Michigan by 17 in their next game. Since then, rattled off 4 straight victories. What changed for this team to help get them to a spot where now they're kind of in the driver's seat for a really nice finish in the Big Ten?
So something that I do think needs to be, I guess, taken into account is those 2 games were smack dab in the middle of this like chaotic stretch in time for Northwestern, where they are the only team I've seen, or at least heard of this year, that has gone through this, but they had an 8-day COVID pause because of a bunch of positive tests on the team, and they didn't have enough players to actually play. So they didn't play and really practice together for 8 days. Because of all the reshuffling of the schedule, they had to play 6 games in 13 days, which nobody does like at any point in college basketball, not even in like real, like, I guess if you got in some really deep conference tournament and you had to run from like the last seed all the way to winning the whole thing, maybe. But they started that stretch. They won 3 of them, and they were rolling coming out of the COVID pause with a win over Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Minnesota. And the last 2 were kind of like they ran away with them and were dominant. But you could kind of see in the second half of those games, like fatigue started to mount in that same stretch. First game back, you had a key rotation piece in Julian Roper, who's a bench player. He kind of rolls his ankle and then he's out. And so you had to go down the bench. You had to find an extra guy in Nick Martinelli, who's actually a freshman who had played like 2 games before that stretch, and he's turned out to be pretty decent.
Right.
But the Iowa game, I thought they hung with Iowa, and then Iowa just shot the lights out in the second half, and the fatigue mounted for Northwestern, and then Iowa really separated. Michigan game, you saw Northwestern hang in there in the first half, and then but it felt weird. That game felt weird the entire time. It felt like there was because they were going on 2 days of prep basically between each game. It felt like that finally caught up to them. Right. It felt like they somehow didn't realize Hunter Dickinson was the best player on the court for Michigan, and he dominated. And then they blew it open in the second half, and I think Northwestern was just gassed. They got an extra day of rest going into that Wisconsin game. They go pull that. I think it may have been an upset at that point in time with the way everything was trending on the road, and it's kind of a fringe quad 1 win right now. But but you've really seen this team just kind of like through all the adversity kind of band together, because you have the senior leaders on this team. You got a lot of seniors. You got a great backcourt that some people are starting to talk about. Is it the best backcourt in the Big Ten? And those two guys have just elevated their level of play, especially Boo Buie over the last 2 weeks. He's been truly unbelievable, coming off Big Ten Player of the Week, and I think March Madness Player of the Week as well. But then you were back on a normal schedule, and I think that has allowed them to get a little bit back to normal on rest. I think there's still a hair of the amount of games that they've played in the last like month is still kind of hanging around. Maybe that's a little bit of why we saw like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde first half, second half last night, where the first half they were absolutely dominating Indiana and just had them on the ropes. They were completely flustered. And the second half, it was like Northwestern. It was like Northwestern played the game like they were the team that was down a ton, because they shot 15 threes and they're 312th in 3-point percentage. Like, it didn't make a lot of sense, but they figured out a way to hang on. But I think it's really a testament to the senior leaders of this team.
It's a great time to start getting hot. As we said, like this, you have your bad games a few weeks ago, get them out of the way, start playing good basketball right now. And Northwestern, before this game, before they beat Indiana, were projected by Joe Lunardi in the latest bracketology as a 7 seed. Right now, this team is trending higher than that. We could be talking about a 6 seed, depending on how the rest of the Big Ten play shakes out. Obviously, we still got quite a few games left, but it doesn't feel like Northwestern is in that spot that they've been historically, where it's like, hey, we're just happy to be even in consideration for the NCAA tournament. And if we make it, we're just really happy to be there. It's not a particularly common occurrence for Northwestern, but it feels like this team, that's not where their goals are. They're not just like, oh, we're hoping to play well enough in this conference to sneak into the big dance. Like, this is a team looking to make it to the Sweet 16. This is the team that's looking to make it even farther than the Sweet 16. I'm curious your thoughts as we've seen this team kind of really start to peak at the right time as they get through that COVID pause. Like, does this feel like a team that can make some actual noise in the NCAA tournament rather than just getting there?
Oh, man, I think so. I think when you look at the way they feel like they're such a difficult matchup for everybody defensively. And it may not, when you look at the roster, it may not jump off the page, but you do have guys like Ty Berry, who's pretty good on defense, will get some steals, but you have Chase Audige, who is one of the best steal guys in the country. I think he was averaging 2.5 steals per game, leading the Big Ten, was top 10 in the country, I think, and way up there when you look at kind of high major schools when you look at that. But they're really good on defense. But to me, the difference is the fact that they have that high level guard play. You have Boo Buie when things go sideways, when things go haywire. Boo Buie, as we saw last night, Boo Buie was the only option of like steadying the ship there, because you had, I mean, Robbie Barron, Chase Audige, Ty Berry were all jacking up threes, and it's like, guys, you've got to lead, relax. And you do have that guy in Boo Buie who, for a while, the Boo Buie floater felt like the only option. But I do think a couple guys that I think have stepped up and gone to a different level and may not get the attention. You have Matthew Nicholson down low, somebody who really didn't play a lot last year, kind of early in the year, like when Northwestern got just hammered by Ohio State in the first game, and it was 34-8, one of the worst starts I've ever seen in a basketball game ever. He was just starting. Like, that was like his first or second game starting in his career. We've seen him step up. I mean, Zach Edey's going to get Zach Edey numbers, but I thought he put up a great fight. He was tipping passes, getting steals. It was really phenomenal to watch him. And then my favorite player to watch on this team is Brooks Barnhizer, because nothing jumps off the stat sheet, but the effort is there. He goes and gets offensive rebounds. He saves balls diving out of bounds. The effort's there. He does all the dirty work. And every now and then he has a play where it's like, I didn't know Brooks Barnhizer could do that. What's up with that? Like last night, he had a spin down the lane and then a no-look bounce pass kind of diagonal behind him for a bucket for, I think it was either Martinelli or Nicholson. I can't recall. But it was just like, there's something to his game, and he's getting better and better, and I think that's what you're seeing with this team.
You kind of alluded to this already, but one thing that I noticed when kind of looking at Northwestern's roster and the success they've had this year is in an era where so many rosters are getting overturned pretty dramatically year in and year out, whether it's huge freshman classes, whether it's transfer portal and bringing in 2, 3, 4, 5 new starters in some capacity. That's not the case for Northwestern. I think their top 5 scorers are all returners. I think 4 of those 5 guys, or maybe even 5 of their top 6 guys, are all guys who've been in the program for at least 2 years already. This is a veteran team. And when you look at the rest of the Big Ten, I mean, Purdue's obviously fantastic, and I don't think that their guard room is bad. It's very, very good, but it's very inexperienced. Mostly freshmen starting for them. Indiana's, of course, relying on Jalen Hood-Schifino, who has been remarkably inconsistent at times this year. When he's on, he's fantastic. When he's not, he can really hurt that team. You look at Northwestern, so much veteran experience. And obviously we talked beforehand about Pete Nance being a player who departed this program. So it's not like they're not ever losing talent, but what does it say about Chris Collins to be able to keep a huge majority of his talent for multiple years, especially when this team hasn't had a ton of success in the last few years? You can see it paying off in a major way. What does it say about him that he was able to do that and keep this team together in an era where that's not easy to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a credit to Chris Collins and the coach that he is. I think he is a very underrated coach in the country to elevate a Northwestern program that had never been to the NCAA tournament until he came along and then now appears to be about to go to its second NCAA tournament. But, I mean, especially because we all know how NIL affects everything in the modern college world with the transfer portal and everything. Northwestern didn't get its NIL ship right until a month and a half ago when they finally announced a collective. They were 8-9 months behind the rest of the second to last team to announce a collective was 8 or 9 months before that, or if not longer. So it's a credit to how he's able to hold this team together. And maybe it's a little bit of a kind of island of misfit toys, a lot of pieces that maybe don't attract a ton of attention. I mean, obviously you had Pete Nance go to UNC and you had Ryan Young go to Duke, but we hadn't seen Boo Buie elevate to this level. Jason Dees was dealing with an injury last year, didn't really look like the guy we've seen this year, but you've seen so many guys elevate their game. And I think that's a credit to this staff and what they've been able to do.
Carter Bird, Locked On Northwestern, thank you so much for coming on the show. Plenty more opportunities, hopefully, to talk about this team as they get into the NCAA tournament and might actually make some noise this year. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
All right, closing out the show, talking with Tristan Freeman of Busting Brackets about the Pitt Panthers, who are tied right now for first place in the ACC and came this close to having sole possession of first place after Virginia nearly lost to Louisville on Wednesday night. Currently, the Pitt Panthers boasting a 6-game winning streak. Tristan, my question for you is pretty simple. Is this team underrated nationally?
Yeah. I mean, when you have the run that the Panthers have had, not only win over Virginia in the past, 2 wins over North Carolina, beat Miami. At this point, it's hard to see the Panthers not only as a top 30 team, but one that could make some noise in the NCAA tournament, assuming that they get there and there's no skid that happens the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, this team has been absolutely fantastic, and I think that so much of the attention on the ACC this year has been about the teams that aren't performing well. We're talking about North Carolina. It's obviously when a team starts the year number 1 and ends up doing what they've done, you get a lot of attention. Duke obviously was always going to get a lot of attention because the transition with the coaching staff. Virginia has been very solid, and then there's a lot of attention on the teams at the very bottom of the ACC that have really, really struggled. And I feel like teams kind of in the middle aren't getting a lot of love. Miami's gotten some love at times. Clemson was generally just considered, it's not really realistic that they're actually number 1 in the ACC, even though for a period of time they were. And then Pitt has kind of come on more lately, but it feels like they're just not really getting a lot of love. And what I want to ask you now is, looking ahead at this team's schedule, we know at Virginia Tech is their next game. That's going to be a tough one. After that, it gets a little bit easier. They got Georgia Tech, they got Syracuse, they got Notre Dame, and then they got that big one at Miami on the road. Do you think that this team, I mean, it's hard to say no to this question as they're currently tied for first place, but do you think that this team could end up winning the ACC regular season title outright?
It's going to be hard because the thing with Virginia, even though they struggled with Louisville, they're a team that just has so many veterans, and the way they play, it's just hard to see them getting upset. And Virginia's schedule, for the most part, is fairly easy down the stretch as well. They don't lose games that they're not supposed to. So if you're Pittsburgh, you may honestly have to run the table. And that's going to include the end of the year at Miami, who's still one game back themselves, and who could make the case that if both teams take a loss, so they could win on the final game. So there's plenty to play for. There's historical records that Pitt's never done in the ACC that they've already accomplished. To keep going, they're pretty much safe in the double bye conversation. But now, why not? If you beat Virginia Tech this weekend, you can absolutely win the ACC.
13-3, it puts you in a pretty darn good spot. But yeah, you acknowledge Virginia. They don't have a particularly tough schedule either. They got Notre Dame, they got Boston College, North Carolina on the road. That's going to be a really, really tough one. Clemson, they got them at home at least, and then Louisville again. So Virginia, very realistic chance they go 5-0 to close out the season, at least 4-1. So it's going to be a tough path for Pitt. And again, this is not a battle between Pitt and Virginia. They're the two teams right there, but Miami is right there as well. Going to be fun to see how things finish up in the ACC. My other question for you, looking at what the ACC is going to do in the NCAA tournament, because I think that conferences tend to get overall reputations, and the Big Ten, has always had a reputation for not doing particularly well in March, but the ACC often kind of seems to put things together at the right time. Obviously, North Carolina went on a run last year as an 8 seed. Looking at the teams right now that are going to be in the field, there's quite a few of them. Do you think this is going to be another year where the ACC is going to kind of make up their reputation by doing well in the NCAA tournament? And if so, are there a couple teams that you think have a realistic chance of really making some noise in March?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's the guard play that runs the NCAA tournament. The ACC has some of them. Miami is one of the best backcourts with Nigel Packett and Isaiah Wong. You got NC State, who quietly has had a great year with Tre'Quavion Smith and Jarkel Joyner, who just had a triple-double this past week. So when you have guards as talented throughout the ACC, and that still doesn't – North Carolina, even if they slide in as the 11th seed, we've seen plenty of double-digit seeds make runs, and you don't want to play a team with two capable 30-point-per-game scorers. And then Duke – they're a team that has never been able to get healthy, but they have the pieces. Kyle Filipowski is one of the best players in the country. Derek Lively has come on as a defensive anchor. Like, they're a team you still don't want to play talent-wise. So it wouldn't be surprising at all if the ACC has another year where they can get 3 teams into the second weekend. And ultimately, everyone's looking up at the Big 12, who could probably get 5 or 6. But I think the ACC can once again hold their own and sort of salvage their national reputation.
Well, sticking with Pitt, let's go back to the Panthers a little bit. Obviously, they have very talented backcourt as well. Jamarius Burton has been fantastic this year, not shooting it exceptionally well, but 16 points, 5 boards, 4.5 assists per game. Looking at Pitt's kind of roster construction and what they have going for them right now, is this a team that you think could make some noise in March, or is it more like, hey, they're going to be a good regular season team, but we'll see how they do when they get to the big dance?
I think in the run where they beat Miami, Wake Forest, and North Carolina, they showed they can win multiple ways. They can go in a shootout. They're a team that already has multiple games with 17+ made 3-pointers. Blake Kinson, the ultimate stretch forward that can shoot the lights out at any given time. And then when you have 4 guards who are all 5th or 6th-year seniors with Nelly Cummins and Burton and Nike Sabani coming off the bench, you have the experience, you have the shooting capabilities, and this is a team that doesn't beat themselves, and that's going to be something that's going to be hard to beat. And then an unsung hero has been Federico, who's been in place of John Hughley, who's out for the year. He's become a legitimate all-ACC defender. Like he shut down Quentin Post at Boston College this week, did a great job on Baycott, did a great job on North Chatham at Miami this year. He's going to be difficult for teams to score on, and I think Pitt's going to be a team that's going to fly under the radar a bit, but depending on the right matchup, can absolutely take on anyone.
Tristan, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show to talk some Pitt Panther basketball, to talk some ACC hoops. Always good to have your insight and expertise on the show.
Yeah, anytime, Andy.
All right, that is going to do it for us today and for this week. Enjoy an epic slate of games on Saturday. More recaps and everything coming your way next week right here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts, available on YouTube as well. Go hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so yet. For now, enjoy the weekend. Talk to you next week. Peace out.